Chapter 9. Journey to an Ancient Home. Daniel barely noticed when the flight attendant reminded him to put his shoes back on after going through security to board the plane. Everything seemed like a blur since Lydia had been presumed dead. It was unbelievable to him that she was gone, as well as everything they had built together.
"We'll see you when we get there, boy,"
Davy had said as an attendant took Chester to be loaded into his cage for the flight. Their dog and the clothes on their backs were all they had left to take with them, besides a few carry-on items that rescue workers had donated at the school's gym. The boys and Rachel were grateful they had worn their new jewels to bed that Lydia and Daniel had given them the night of the earthquake. Daniel gazed at his watch and matching wedding ring as they were all seated on the plane, knowing he would never take them off.
"How are you feeling, Rach?"
Joel asked as they all loaded the plane.
So far, so good.
Rachel winced over her migraine, and Joel noticed. Just then, Davy's phone vibrated. Davy had forgotten that he had grabbed it to use as a flashlight during the earthquake. He answered it and awkwardly handed it to Joel.
"Hey, Joel. We've been trying to reach you, buddy. Judas told us what happened. We're so sorry about what happened to your mom and family."
"Thanks, Tom. It means a lot."
"I hear you're about to leave the country with all that's been happening."
"Yeah, our flight's about to leave for Israel. We're about to get into the air now. Aren't you all planning to evacuate? I thought Judas was going to grab a flight with you."
"No, we've decided to stay in America for now. They say our new location in Texas will be stable, and we can get our chopper there. It's got underground bunkers and everything we should need in case of more emergencies. Send me your contact information, will you? We're about to leave, and we've got a lot of ministering to do here in our country. If you're still interested, I've got loads of work for you and Rachel over in Israel. Stay safe, buddy. We are praying for you all."
"Thanks, Tom. We're praying for you all too. We will be in touch soon."
Joel ended the call and handed back Davy's phone. It was good to hear from Tom. Since working for Tom's Christian-based news channel, Joel felt he had a special purpose in his life.
"That was Tom. They still want me and Rachel to work on their news stories from Israel. Thanks, Davy."
We're going international now, huh?
Said Rachel. She looked at her phone and noticed that it had gone dead. Daniel nodded to Joel and Rachel that he was proud of them, and Davy patted Joel's back. It was good to feel that a small piece of their lives could become somewhat normal again, even though everything else was changing.
"Like I always say, you both make a strong team,"
said Daniel. Davy finally smiled. He wasn't joking around like usual, but it was the first time he seemed to relax a little. Joel glanced at Susie, Caleb, and Levi. They had been somewhat refreshed at the emergency shelter in the gym. Although they no longer had a layer of dust on them, it didn't change their expressions of grief. Joel remembered the conversation with their family shortly before they all left for the airport.
"Susie, I know that Lydia and Bill will not rest if we leave you and your boys behind like this. Come with us to Israel. You're our family, not just by distant blood, but by what we've all been through."
Daniel's words to them rang true. They were distant relations. The only difference in their last names was that Bill's family had an extra N for Cohen. Both families had descended from their ancient priestly ancestor Aaron, Moses' brother from the Old Testament. Susie's family was surnamed Levi and was descendants of Levi's priestly tribe. Little Levi was named after this fact. Some of Susie's side had fled to America after the Holocaust, but after a drastic rise in anti-Semitism, most of them had already traveled back to Israel to live permanently. Most of Daniel's side had fled to Israel, living there ever since 1948. He wondered how much had changed since he and his family had left over a decade ago. Susie glanced around, hoping Bill's coffin was secure in the cargo area. Due to the nature of their evacuation, she was thankful that the authorities were able to arrange his transport on their same flight. Levi began to perk up a little, wondering about their new journey. Although they held the sick feeling of grief over losing their loved ones, they sensed that this was the right next step. The plane was almost ready for takeoff, and the other passengers were intensely alert as the flight attendant went through safety precautions. The seats were so packed that it was a minor miracle that Rachel's parents could get them all tickets with seats together, but that was far from everyone's minds. As they made their ascent, the family continued thinking about the loss of Lydia and Bill and where their lives were going. Would this be the last time they would ever see America, the only home the boys had ever known? They all sat back, attempting to relax in silence. Their only comfort in leaving was knowing they were fulfilling Lydia's wishes of returning to Israel, the family's ancient home from the past. Rachel thought about seeing her parents after all of this time. Would they welcome her back into their lives with open arms? Were they worried about her? Or were they just doing what people expected of them during a crisis? Her mom's tone told her that nothing had changed. She would probably convince her dad to go somewhere else important and leave her behind again. They moved around so much for work that she never had a real home. At least she had Joel by her side, she thought, as she leaned on his shoulder. She felt bad for him over the loss of his mom. Her heart deeply grieved for Lydia, and Rachel was surprised by the close bond she had made with her within just a few short years. Rachel had felt a connection with Lydia as closely as she could imagine what it must be like to have a caring mother. The neighborhood kids felt the same way, and many often gathered at the Cohens' home for a nice home-cooked meal. Joel was relieved to have Rachel safe, but his mind was delving deeper into sorrow. He looked out of the window, trying to grasp the feeling of the changes that were taking place. For a moment he remembered seeing his dad's look of fear and desperation as the floor underneath his feet gave way and collapsed. It felt as if the whole world was falling apart. He remembered Lydia's last words, telling them to pray before bed. Joel tried to hold it back, but the tears came as they flew further away. A distant memory suddenly came to his mind.
Hold on tight, sweetie.
It was his mom's voice, and Joel was a toddler. She was pushing him on a plastic swing in a park, the kind of swing that forms around a small child to keep him safe. Joel remembered laughing uncontrollably as she swung him higher and higher. Unexpectedly, he felt closer to her as the plane continued soaring upward. Davy was looking out of the window too. However, all he could feel now was an uncertain numbness that seemed foreign to him. He knew he should feel emotional about his mom. Everyone expected it, but he just could not make the right facial expressions. Although he missed his mom more than anything, the tears would not come now as they did for everyone else. He thought he should man up and wanted to be there for his dad and brother. His throat strained so tightly that it felt like it had been put in a noose. He put his head down, trying to deal with it, but he found himself putting earbuds in to take it off his mind. Once the flight was up in the air, it was not long before they could see the ground below. It had been littered with sinkholes. Some areas had so much dust that it had become difficult to see. Others had fresh fires caused by explosions from some of the pipelines that had been a new concern. Somehow they could spot the place where their house had once stood. It was all gone. A bottomless pit of darkness replaced their quaint, comfortable home, full of a lifetime of memories. Daniel's shoulders convulsed in sorrow as the boys attempted to comfort their dad.
I can't help but feel like we're leaving her.
He cried. He began rending his shirt in anguish.
Dad, you did all you could,
said Joel, and Davy agreed. They patted his back, and he sank into his seat, looking defeated. The group sat in silence until they reached an altitude where the ground was no longer visible.
Maybe we're closer with her now, Dad,
said Joel as they looked into the clouds.
Maybe you're right, Joel,
said Daniel. Joel noticed that his dad's hair and face seemed so pale, as if Lydia's death had taken several years off his life. Suddenly, the plane began to shake. Davy looked out of the window and saw thunderclouds.
Flight attendants, please remain seated,
announced the captain. Another pilot came over the intercom.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a zone of turbulence. Please keep your seatbelts fastened as long as the seatbelt sign is illuminated.
Davy continued looking out of the window. Then he thought that he saw the outline of a building similar to the city in the clouds they had seen at the ballpark the day before. This time it appeared closer since they were in the airplane. He squinted and rubbed his eyes. Was he seeing things? It was gone when he peered out over the wing. He looked at the others, but they were still comforting Daniel. Best not to say anything. Before long, the clouds dispersed, and their plane edged into a smooth clearing above. Several hours passed, and as the sun set, they all relaxed enough to get some sleep. Joel's eyes twitched. He was again immersed in the same dream from the night of the earthquake. Joel, Davy, and the small boy with plastic shields chased the blue ball down the stairs toward the tunnel. At the end of the dream this time, the ice seemed to overtake him and draw him into the tunnel. The low growl made his hair stand on end. The high-pitched screams inside the tunnel pierced his ears. Then he heard his mother's voice screaming as darkness enclosed him. He jumped in his seat, shivering and breaking into a sweat. Rachel woke up as well.
Was it that dream again?
She asked. Joel nodded and attempted to gather himself, breathing heavily. Then Davy leaned up, realizing that he had dozed off. He looked out the window and noticed it was getting daylight again.
Hey, look! There are small white hills down there. When did it start snowing?
The rest of the group and the surrounding passengers, who had already awoken from their naps, chuckled at his remark. Davy looked at them, confusedly lowering his eyebrows.
What?
That's not snow on the ground, it's the tops of the clouds,
said Rachel.
Oh!
Said Davy, feeling embarrassed. He was too young to remember his first time flying, so it felt like a new experience. He did not realize how high they had climbed above the clouds.
It's okay, Davy. I thought the same thing on my first flight,
said Rachel, trying to stifle her chuckle. Everyone welcomed the brief smiles, although Davy still blushed over his obvious blunder.
Well, it does look cool.
We have 1 hour until our descent into Tel Aviv,
announced the attendant. They looked at one another, knowing the reality that they were about to step into their new lives in a new country. Davy spoke up.
What's it like in Israel, Dad?
The land is different, so are the people. There's a lot of desert around it, but Israel has become fertile and green since our people returned in 1948. I was born later, but I still remember our people's eagerness to rebuild our country. There is a presence of God there that you won't feel anywhere else.
It is true,
Susie responded.
Our family's ancestral home is a place that does not compare with any other. Bill and I often thought about returning like my sister Martha has done. Most of America has become a cesspool of hate and idolatry. But despite enemies around Israel's borders, our people openly worship God within Israel. You won't face the level of persecution and unbelief that we saw in America.
That sounds like a nice change,
said Rachel.
You can tour some of the original locations you've read about in the Bible,
added Daniel.
Other areas are newer with modern layers of buildings built over the top of ancient parts. We have a cousin who tried to dig a basement and found a whole street buried below his property, not to mention our grandfather's treasures that he discovered.
Wow, I bet there's buried treasure everywhere,
said Davy. Caleb and Levi managed to look slightly interested.
Where will we go, Dad?
Asked Joel.
I mean, after we get Rachel connected with her parents.
I've been in contact with my brother, Yosef. He has agreed to let us stay with him until we can get our own place. Susie and her boys are staying with her sister Martha. She's lived there for several years now. Remember,
he said to Susie,
you and the boys know that if you ever need anything, you have us cousins to help as well.
Susie shook her head thankfully, and her boys echoed their thanks.
How is Uncle Yosef after all these years?
Joel hesitated.
I mean, I know you've talked, once or twice a year?
Actually, he was glad to hear from me. He was sorry to hear about your mom, Bill, and everything that has happened. He had been trying to call us when the lines were down.
That's good then. I was afraid we would be walking into a family feud,
Joel said.
You're forgetting about how my family is, so don't speak so soon,
said Rachel. Davy glanced at his contacts on his phone.
Dad, do you think we will ever return to the United States?
Asked Davy.
I don't think so, Davy. It does not look good. Besides, if you start digging around Israel, you may never want to go back,
Daniel said.
I was speaking with someone on the plane earlier who was from St. Louis. He said that their area was also hit hard, which is why Tom had to move locations to Texas.
Joel nodded.
It seems that the earthquake had centered in Missouri's New Madrid seismic zone, but it had spread rapidly into the Wabash Valley fault system in Indiana and other states around us overnight. People are worried about it causing even more fault lines to become active.
Most of our friends had already taken shelter before we left,
said Davy sadly.
I heard a small group of your friends making plans with their families to go to England,
said Joel.
Yeah,
Caleb said.
Most of them have left the country too.
Levi only slightly agreed and continued staring blankly out the window.
Really?
Davy was surprised. A few of his friends had stopped by the shelter to say sorry about his mom, but Davy had been so shattered by what had happened that he hadn't even said goodbye. He regretted that now. Everything had changed so quickly, and he wondered if he would ever see any of his friends again. Davy began scrolling through his contact list. However, he put it away for now since it had to be on airplane mode. Daniel continued.
They've seen signs as far as Yellowstone, and we all know what will happen if that erupts. Best to get out now. Flights leaving all over the country are completely booked. People are starting to panic so badly that some city airports have mobs forming.
The group sat silently, letting their new reality set in. Then Davy looked closely out of the window and said,
Hey, I can see land now.
Everyone gazed out of the windows to see their new home. They could see patches of green against a desert landscape. Bleach-white skyscrapers jutted out against ancient farmland.
Welcome to the Ben Gurion Airport in Israel,
announced the flight attendant. Daniel was right. Everything was going to be different.